and thank you very much for coming along this evening. This evening we're going to look at some very rapidly evolving things that in fact demonstrate that at the very highest levels leadership has collapsed, not just in government circles. Oddly enough, this is where we think of it most immediately, but in fact it's happening throughout our culture at this point, and we're needing to look at other institutions that are failing us as well. So we're going to be looking at this whole question of sleepwalking beyond the point of no return, non-thought and nonsense in high places. We really have a dramatic example of it in high places in government, but we also have it in high places in private institutions like universities. And it's rather discouraging. In effect, we're up against a intransigence and a kind of blindness, a cultural blindness. It's most dramatic perhaps at the national level, where we get deliberate talk about going off into space, as if that were some sort of solution to the problems that we're facing here on Earth. It's really rather staggering, because the President of the United States has called for creating a new space force, reminiscent of the Reagan era of space wars and the like, but talking about it in frontier terms, the next frontier. And of course we all know in American history the only thing you can do with a frontier is conquer it, right? That's been a long-standing feature of American history, westward expansion and conquest of anything that was there, especially natural resources and the indigenous populations. And now that we've sort of absorbed the frontiers on Earth, it's as if we're going off to frontiers of space. A really absurd idea, but people seem to have it.
The 1,300 active satellites above the Earth provide a wide array of services, some of which are vital for emergency response and for the military. An attack on a country's satellites could be catastrophic, and many worry that space may become a new theatre of war. Large powers have developed various capabilities for destroying satellites. Now, companies are building advanced service spacecraft that could become weapons. The purpose of these service craft is to repair and move existing satellites. But all it takes is a change of intent for these spacecraft to become warcraft. A Chinese space weapon test, which destroyed one of its own defunct satellites in 2007, created a great deal of debris that put other satellites in danger. If debris from one act of destruction goes on to destroy further satellites, a chain reaction could ensue, rendering some orbits unusable. This is known as the Kessler syndrome. Because America's armed forces gain more capability from satellites than any other country, America has the most to lose from war in space. It is planning to increase its capabilities in the area. President Trump wants a new space force. The world will hope for peace in the cosmos, but history suggests that such ideals are not easily maintained. Coming up next Thursday, why are humans going to Mars?
Well, that's a good question. Why are humans going to Mars? I mean, this is pretty extraordinary. We've just talked about weaponizing space and making it into a theater of potential frontier warfare. This is really a case of non-thought, total non-thought. When the military is hyper-dependent on satellite communications and it thinks it can weaponize it in such a way that prevents other countries from weaponizing space, Chinese have already done it in a way with their own satellite, destroyed their own satellite. No big difficulty in destroying other people's satellites. India has already done it. They've created and destroyed a satellite. We're on a sphere here, and we're dealing with kind of OK corral frontier mentality. We're really out of our depth here, and in fact in danger of blowing up the human prospect because of a misplaced metaphor. A frontier on a sphere. This was pointed out long ago by academics. An article in the Yale Review appeared called Rubbish and Racism, Problems of Boundary in an Ecosystem, that emphasized that we've got real problems with notions of linear space. It was emphasized again in reference to infinite growth on a finite planet. It's simply not possible. Scholars pointed this out in Oxford and have made the case around the world. Infinite growth on a finite planet is not possible in anything physical. So, we need to pay attention here.
There is no known human society that has ever persisted in dominating its own ecosystem. What's it done before? It's hived off to colonize others. And we even have a physicist suggesting we should hive off to colonize somewhere in space. This is where Columbus, in a sense, introduced the biggest misplaced metaphor in history. He got to the New World, let's call it that, and Magellan after him, shortly thereafter, and went around the whole shooting match, and pretty much proved that it's round. But Columbus and everyone who came after him unleashed the biggest chapter in linear thinking in human history, the frontier. Endless frontiers, movement out into space in a linear inclined plane. This is progress. This is out there to conquer. Of course, we disregarded the populations that lived on the other side of the frontier. They didn't count. White settler frontierism is at the core of the colonial mistake. And unless we can transcend that form of linear thinking, and I don't think it's going to be easy. I mean, in the United States, even our greatest cultural heroes like John Kennedy elected his constituency and mobilized them on the basis of frontiers of space. Well, there's nothing more absurd than the idea of frontiers off of a sphere, right? How are you going to draw it? It's a linear metaphor off of a sphere. Can't happen, won't happen.
Can't happen, won't happen, but we have presidents who are trying to make it happen. Very, very tragic in a way, because as it was pointed out back in the early 80s in this publication, and in fact in the 70s before this, because this was based on an article written in 1971, we had fed the heart on fantasies. The heart has grown brutal from the fair. This itself is a quote from W.B. Yeats on Meditations in Time of Civil War, thinking about the Irish Civil War, the Irish problem, as it were. None of these things have been solved, and in the process we had fed the heart on fantasies. It's grown brutal from the fair. Well, what we now have is an indication of a time frame to this.
It's going to be a scorcher of a century. For years, scientists have been warning us that if we don't do something quick, global warming will change our planet forever. Now we have a date for when that permanent change will happen, and it's a lot sooner than you'd think. The 0 hour for global temperatures is 2047, 34 years from now. At that point, say the authors of a new study published in Nature, climate change will lock into place. Once that happens, every year after 2047 will be hotter than even the current hottest year on record. By 2047, the study concludes, our current record temperatures will become the new normal temperatures. In some places, the 0 hour for global warming will come even sooner than that 2047 date. The authors of the study estimate that Singapore, for example, will reach its temperature point of no return as soon as 2028. Cairo, they say, could see a start to see a lock-in of global warming in 2036, 11 years before the global H-hour of 2047. According to Chris Field, one of the scientists who worked on the project, one can think of this year, 2047, as a kind of threshold into a hot new world from which one never goes back.
Irreversible climate change unleashed.
It's going to be a scorcher of a...
You bet, a real scorcher.
If it's wrong to wreck the climate, it's wrong to profit from that wreckage. If it's wrong to wreck the climate, it's wrong to profit from that wreckage. If it's wrong to wreck the climate, it's wrong to profit from that wreckage.
Now you recognize the voice.
If it's wrong to wreck the climate, it's wrong
You recognize the
to profit
person
from that
involved.
wreckage.
This is Bill McKibben's message, and it's now the message that's being taken up across town here. Very clear. If it's wrong to wreck the climate, it's wrong to profit from that wreckage. He himself is a graduate of Harvard, and many of the students at Harvard have taken up that rallying cry to confront their own president. President of Harvard, the newly appointed president of Harvard, with the demand for divestment. Here again, we have an example of no sense and nonsense in the highest levels of our institutions. Amid student calls for a forum on divestment, Weiskel remains steadfast, which is to say, he retains the policy of don't discuss divestment that Drew Faust, President Drew Faust, had enshrined in her presidency before him. Weiskel remains steadfast. As he put it, the endowment exists to support the institution, to support our students, and to support our faculty, Weiskel said. And it was on those terms that our donors have entrusted the resources to us. They've said, here are these resources which we want you to invest to support these activities, not to accomplish some other ends. What an unbelievably arrogant statement. If those some other ends are preserving human life on the planet, that's just a distraction, according to President Weiskel. That's getting in the way of the goals of the investors. Really quite arrogant on the part of this one person at the very highest level of this institution. It'll remain to be seen whether the students can make their point during Harvard Heat Week. This is coming up this week. As I say, they've taken the rallying cry from Bill McKibben. Take a look.
If it's wrong to wreck the climate, it's wrong to profit from that wreckage.
I'm doing this for my home.
I'm doing this for my patients.
For my sister.
For my students. For real justice.
For a collective future.
This is who I love.
This is why I act.
We are Divest Harvard.
We're students,
Faculty, alumni,
and members of the community calling on Harvard to divest from fossil fuel companies
In order to stigmatize the fossil fuel industry
and open up space for political action on climate change.
Fossil fuel divestment means taking your money out of investments in fossil fuels and instead putting it into more socially responsible companies.
Our message is simple. If it's wrong to wreck the planet and threaten millions of lives, then it's wrong to profit from that destruction.
By investing its endowment in fossil fuel companies, Harvard profits from climate change.
this needs to stop.
The fundamental injustice of climate change is that the poor and marginalized communities who have contributed the least to the problem will be hit first and hardest by its effects.
So why is divestment the right thing to do?
Fossil fuel companies have four times
Four times more coal, oil, and natural gas in their reserves than is safe to emit.
and they will burn it unless we figure out a way to slow them down.
So why doesn't our government take action? One of the main reasons for this is the overwhelming influence of the fossil fuel industry on our democracy, blocking legislation and funding climate denial.
So we're taking our future into our own hands.
We're going after the fossil fuel industry directly, specifically their reputations.
We know that divestment will not bankrupt the fossil fuel companies, literally.
Our aim, rather, is to bankrupt them politically.
Divestment works. In the past, it's been used to undermine the tobacco industry and to end the apartheid regime in South Africa.
An overwhelming majority of students have voted for divestment,
as well as over 1,000 alumni,
hundreds of faculty, and 65,000 community members.
So we're asking Harvard, whose side are you on? Ours or the fossil fuel industries?
At its best, Harvard has always led on the most important issues of the day.
We're calling on Harvard to stand on the right side of history.
Because everything we love is at stake.
And we no longer have the luxury of time.
So we're talking to the media.
We're signing petitions.
We're going to rallies.
Some of us are taking Harvard to court.
And some of us are sitting in.
And we're risking arrest.
We're going to do whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
and we're not going to stop until Harvard does what's right.
On the week of April 13th, many of us will participate in highly civil disobedience.
It's called Harvard Heat Week.
We're sitting in peacefully, politely, but firmly around Massachusetts Hall,
calling on Harvard to divest.
Stand with us.
Stand with us.
Stand with us. Go to harvardheatweek.org to learn more and find out how you can participate.
Right. Keep an eye on Harvard Heat Week and see how you can participate.
We know that most politicians don't want to talk to us. Good. We don't want to talk to them either. We want them to talk to the scientists instead. Listen to them. Because we are just repeating what they are saying and have been saying for decades. Just unite behind the science. That is our demand. When many politicians talk about the school strike for the climate, they talk about almost anything except from the climate crisis.
They talk about almost anything except from the climate crisis, as she said. This Swedish youngster, 16 years old now, talks about the politics of distraction from adults. It's pretty extraordinary. It's been pointed out again earlier that this is the standard tactic. Back in the American Behavioral Scientist in 2005, there was a whole article on From Sidekick to Sideshow, Celebrity, Entertainment, and the Politics of Distraction. Why? Americans are sleepwalking toward the end of the earth. As it was pointed out then, we've become so accustomed to our illusions that we mistake them for reality. As Borstein pointed out in 1961, since the turn of the 21st century, the signs have been clear that the American political system has changed into a celebrity regime. This is the politics of distraction, and by shifting the public's attention from the essential to the superficial, it does the nation a great disservice. Why Americans are sleepwalking toward the end of the world, the end of the earth, and the reason is simply they've been distracted by the politics of histrionics of distraction. We're sleepwalking past some crucial points of no return. The non-thought and the nonsense in high places is distracting us from the key goal, getting carbon out of the atmosphere and preventing any more to go in. Fortunately, the students are getting organized. In addition, the scientists are backing them up. There's a new kind of citizen science alliance that's emerging around the world that really is going to take on some of these issues with greater and greater forcefulness.